Welcome back to the channel. It's been several weeks since I last published because I decided to change my format from brief summaries to more in-depth analysis. And the reason I decided to do this is because it doesn't really matter what the news is, I think, but more why the news is. Because things happen, but if they don't have context, then it doesn't really matter. So rather than go just top stories daily, to really kind of dive deep into what's going on and give us a little sense of context. And I look forward to your feedback. Hours before I dropped this video, an attempted assassination against former President Trump occurred in Pennsylvania. Needless to say, this act of wanton violence shifts the political landscape out from under us, as Trump has often portrayed himself as a martyr or victim fighting for the common man. Now this assassination appears to irrevocably alter the political landscape in Trump's favor ahead of the November elections. President Biden condemned this attack and correctly said,
"There's no place in America for this kind of violence. It's sick."
And with that, I'd like to present what I previously had put together, even as the Democrats are in disarray, as President Joe Biden stubbornly clings on, even as doubts about his age and mental acuity have dogged him for weeks with calls for him to step aside that are steadily growing. The debate between President Joe Biden and former President Trump was an unmitigated disaster for President Biden and an unexpected success for Trump. The debate hosted by CNN quickly turned uncivil, with Trump calling Biden a Manchurian candidate and Biden accusing Trump of infidelity. The two also bickered over their golf scores. And what does this have to do about a presidential election?
That city would have been destroyed. When you look at all of they took over big chunks of Seattle. I was all set to bring in the National Guard. They heard that. They saw them coming, and they left immediately. What he said about this whole subject is so off. Peacefully patriotic. One other thing.
And despite his efforts to gain momentum, the debate left Democrats debating whether or not Biden himself should remain on the ticket. The race was already tight. Trump was marginally ahead in most swing states, but it was still neck and neck. According to The Economist's polling data, Donald Trump already had a small but clear lead over Joe Biden headed into the 2024 presidential election. And if we look at the map and head over to Georgia, Trump had a 76 in 100 chance of winning. Pennsylvania's polling favored Trump's 69 in 100 chance. Wisconsin's polling favored Trump 66 in 100. Nevada put Trump's chances of winning at 61 in 100. Michigan gave a 61 in 100 chance to favor Trump as well. Minnesota was the only outlier in this pre-debate polling data, with a 63 in 100 chance of a Biden win. But then things twisted in a way that President Biden didn't expect. He had invited Trump to debate him early. The president and his aides have claimed that the president was sick.
Asked about, and also he had a cold.
But what is particularly galling is that the president, although he was raspy and weak and got sloppy and spouted some facts wrong, he faced a barrage of lies from Donald Trump.
As far as Russia and Ukraine, if we had a real president, the president that was respected by Putin, he would have never invaded Ukraine.
And just for history's sake, so that our commentary is based on facts, not opinion, let's rattle off a fire hose of untruths. And to be fair, let's start with Biden's sloppy misstatements. Biden claimed that he was the only president in a while who didn't have any troops dying anywhere in the world. Correction, troops have died on his watch. President Biden claimed that there was a $15 per shot cap on insulin in Medicare. Actually, it's a $35 per month cap. President Biden claimed a $200 cap on overall drug spending in Medicare. Correction, that's a $2,000 cap. Biden claimed the border now has fewer crossings than when Trump was in office. That's not true. President Biden claimed that unemployment was at 15% when he took office. Correction, actually it was 6.4%. President Biden claimed that Trump wants to get rid of Social Security. And while Trump has many flaws, there is no evidence that he wanted to get rid of Social Security. President Biden claimed that billionaires pay 8.2% in taxes. Actually, it's much higher. It might still be too low, but it's higher than 8.2%. President Biden claimed that Trump told Americans to inject some bleach during the COVID crisis. That was a weird event, but he didn't really firmly advise people to do that. Trump's meandering into whether or not people should inject bleach was a pretty strange event in the briefing room, but he didn't actually specifically advise people to do that. President Biden claimed that Border Patrol endorsed him. Actually, it was the union that represents Border Control that endorsed him. President Biden claimed that he had created 800,000 new manufacturing jobs since January 2023. Actually, it was more along the lines of 25,000. President Biden's claims were sloppy, but the whole debate was sloppy. It was a mess. However, if one thing that Donald Trump does, he lies, he gaslights, and let's just rattle them off. Trump claimed that some Democratic states allow babies to be executed after birth. Killing people is not allowed. Trump claimed that every legal scholar wanted Roe versus Wade overturned and abortion policy returned to the states. That is emphatically not true. Trump claimed that everybody, even Democrats, wanted Roe overturned. That is just not true. Trump claimed that the U.S. currently has the biggest budget deficit ever. Correction, that is not true. Actually, the biggest budget deficit was under former President Trump in 2020. Trump claimed that the U.S. has a record trade deficit with China. Again, the largest record deficit was under Trump in 2018. Trump claimed that Biden gets a lot of money from China. That is emphatically not true. Trump claimed that there were no terrorist attacks under his presidency. Actually, there were multiple attacks under his presidency. Trump claimed that Iran didn't fund Hamas, Hezbollah, or other terror groups under him. Iran didn't take a pause because Donald Trump was president. Trump claimed that Biden wants to quadruple people's taxes. That is untrue. President Biden has made it very clear that he wants to raise the marginal tax rate of U.S. citizens making more than $400,000 a year. That means that everything below that would still be taxed at the same rate, and then above, there would be a marginal increase on that income. Then there would also be an increase in corporate taxes, but nothing like a quadrupling of taxes. Trump claimed that the U.S. has provided more aid to Ukraine than Europe. That, again, is not true. Europe is providing more funding for Ukraine than the United States. Trump claimed that the U.S. has provided $200 billion in aid to Ukraine. That is just not true. The U.S. has provided a lot of aid, more along the lines of maybe half that, maybe $110 billion. Trump claimed that 18 or 19 million people have crossed the border under Biden. Again, that's just not true. It's much, much less. It's probably more around 5 million people. Donald Trump claimed that many migrants are from prisons or mental institutions. Again, just not true. Trump said, referring to Biden, that he's the one that killed people with a bad border and flooding, hundreds of thousands of people dying and also killing our citizens when they come in. There is no evidence of that. Now over to January 6th. Trump claimed that Nancy Pelosi turned down his offer of 10,000 National Guard troops on January 6th. There is no evidence of that. Absolutely none. She never got such an offer. Donald Trump claimed that Pelosi acknowledges she turned down the troops. Again, a flat-out lie. Trump claimed that Trump deployed the National Guard to Minneapolis in 2020 following the death of George Floyd. Actually, that was the Democratic Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, who deployed the National Guard to the city. And getting back to the election fraud claims, Trump claims that there was ridiculous fraud in the 2020 election. This is withering and tiring and immiserating. There were 62 court cases that debunked such fraud. Donald Trump claimed that NATO was going out of business before he took office. Again, this is not true. It is true that the United States wanted certain member states of NATO to contribute more in their military, but there was no evidence at all that NATO was, quote, going out of business. Trump claimed that the U.S. is paying 100% of NATO before he was elected. It is true that the United States pays a lot for NATO because we get a lot in return. In fact, I was born in an American military hospital in Germany. The United States probably pays about 71% on NATO, but we get a lot for it, but not 100%. Trump claimed that it was Trump, not Biden, who is the one who lowered insulin prices in Medicare. To be fair, Trump did it for some people, but Biden did it for far more people. Trump claimed that Biden indicted him. Correction, this is untrue. The New York Attorney General, Alvin Bragg, indicted Donald Trump in a state, not a federal court. The federal government had nothing to do with it. Trump claimed that Europe has no U.S. cars and won't accept them. Again, this is just not true. Trump claimed that food prices quadrupled under Biden. That is a wild exaggeration. There have been a rise in food prices, but not a quadrupling of prices. Trump claimed that Biden made up the idea he called dead service members suckers and losers. Again, this has been verified. It was former Chief of Staff John Kelly who corroborated the Atlantic's reporting that Trump had made such awful remarks about dead service members. Trump claimed that Biden called black people super predators for 10 years. Correction, Biden never used that term, although Hillary Clinton did. Trump claimed that his tax cut was the largest in U.S. history. This is not true, although Biden did once claim that Trump's were the largest. In fact, Ronald Reagan's tax cuts were much higher. Trump claimed that China and others stopped buying from Iran under pressure from him. Again, this is untrue. Trump claimed that he created Veterans' Choice Program. Actually, that was former President Obama who signed that into law in 2014. Trump claimed that Biden got rid of Veterans' Choice. Correction, Biden has not done that. Trump's claimed that we had the greatest economy in the history of our country and we have never done so well. Correction. By just about any important measure, the economy under Donald Trump has not done as well as it did under Presidents Truman, Johnson, and Clinton. It's just not accurate. And firstly, the pandemic triggered a massive recession during Trump's presidency, leading to the government to borrow $3.1 trillion in 2020 to stabilize the economy. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the civilian labor force participation rate decreased during the Trump administration. Trump left the White House with fewer jobs than when he entered. That's a rare feat for a president. Even setting aside the pandemic-related issues, economic growth averaged 2.67% under Trump's first 3 years. That's decent, but it's nowhere near the 4% growth averaged under Bill Clinton's 2 terms from 1993 to 2001, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. In fact, growth has been stronger under Biden so far than it was under Trump. And while Trump did see unemployment rate drop to 3.5% before the pandemic, the labor force participation for people aged 25 to 54, the core of the U.S. working population, was higher under Clinton. The participation rate has also been higher under Biden than it was under Trump. Trump often touts how low inflation was under his administration, noting that gasoline prices fell to as low as $1.77 a gallon. However, this price drop occurred during a pandemic lockdown when few people were driving. The low prices were a result of a global health crisis, not Trump's policies. Trump claimed that on January 6th, we had the lowest taxes ever. We had the lowest regulations ever on January 6th. Donald Trump's method of answering the questions about January 6th was to divert and distract. Again, his diversion is just not true. Trump did cut some taxes, but there have been periods where taxes have been much lower. And of course, Trump on January 6th said they talk about the relatively small amount of people that went to the Capitol. In many cases were ushered in by police. This is absolutely false. I was there. The attack on the U.S. Capitol was the deadliest assault on the seat of American power in over 200 years. This has been thoroughly documented by videos, photographs, and people who were there, and thousands of people who descended on the Capitol in what became a brutal scene of hand-to-hand combat with police, and I got punched right in the face by those people. In an internal memo on March 7th, 2023, U.S. Capitol Police Chief J. Thomas Manger said that the allegation that our officers helped the rioters and acted as tour guides is outrageous and false. A Capitol Police spokesperson confirmed the memo's authenticity to the Associated Press. More than 1,400 people have been charged with federal crimes stemming from the riot. More than 850 people have pleaded guilty to crimes, and 200 others have been convicted at trial. This onslaught of lies is exhausting, and it's almost impossible to keep up with them as lies move fast and fact-checking is slow. Heather Cox Richardson summed up Trump's strategy and shower of lies this way. She wrote, "This was not a debate. It was Trump using a technique that actually has a formal name, the gish gallop. although I suspect he comes by it naturally. It's a rhetorical technique in which someone throws out a fast string of lies, non sequiturs, and specious arguments, so many that it is impossible to fact-check or read in the amount of time it took to say them. Trying to figure out how to respond makes an opponent look confused because they don't know where to start grappling with the flood that has just hit them, and it is a form of gaslighting. As a journalist who has endured Trump's gaslighting at the White House from him and his minions, I'm astonished that Biden's team didn't prepare him adequately for that form of verbal abuse. And we saw what we saw, and we can't unsee what we saw. Post-debate, Biden told reporters that he acknowledged the challenge was debating a liar. This is true. Trump, in contrast, just showered lies as though he were just throwing confetti.
Take the life of the baby in the 9th month and even after birth, because...
And while Trump's lies should be disqualifying, polling data doesn't bode well for Biden's re-election chances. Now, according to 538's averages of polling data, Trump is ahead by 2 or 3 points, depending on whom you ask. The economists give Trump a 1-point advantage over Biden, 45 to 44%. The New York Times reports on July 8th that Trump has 49% support, and Biden is at 43%. And if that polling data bears out, Biden is almost sure to lose to Trump. And what's so frustrating for the Biden team is that throughout June, Biden and Trump were essentially tied. Now Trump's chances of winning 270 electoral votes are staggeringly higher. The Economist puts Trump's chances of winning the general election over President Biden at a 3 in 4 chance. The breakdown of odds in swing states show devastating chances for Biden. Not only does Trump lead in the 5 swing states of Michigan, Nevada, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, but now recent polling suggests that Trump is ahead of Biden in Virginia by 2.2%. This is a state that all politicos had until days ago marked off as a Democratic-leaning state. Real clear polling aggregates, data from a dozen survey organizations, report that Trump is marginally ahead of Biden. And while it's true that Trump has seen some surge in support since the debate, President Biden's support has just fallen off a cliff dramatically, as we can see by this graph. And more to the point, the Wall Street Journal shows data that shows that Trump enjoys a 6-point lead over Biden. That is outside the margin of error and would hand Trump a landslide victory. The Wall Street Journal poll shows that fully 80% of voters say that Biden is too old to serve for a second term, and that they are panicked about the 81-year-old president's possible cognitive decline and their party's weakening election prospects in November. The Biden camp isn't listening too well. The White House press secretary appeared to dismiss press's concerns, saying that
he was also continued to do his presidential duties. He worked late in doing that, and he also prepared for the debate. And on top of that, there was obviously the jet lag, as you just asked about, and also he had a cold.
And that we all just have colds. And there is some rebranding going on. President Biden did meet with Democratic governors in the Rose Garden. President Biden released a letter to supporters stating that he is firmly committed to staying in this race, and he also said that it's time for any speculation for him to go to end. Vice President Kamala Harris acknowledged,
yes, there was a slow start, but it was a strong finish.
Biden's rally in Raleigh, North Carolina was strong, but it was predictable, and it was before a teleprompter. The debate fallout from political pundits, the chattering class, and editorial boards has been swift and severe. The donor class publicly expressed its frustration with Biden. Abigail Disney, the heir to the Disney family fortune and major party donor, announced she would withhold Democratic donations unless Biden dropped out of the race. This is realism, not disrespect, Disney told CNBC, adding, if Biden does not step down, the Democrats will lose. Of that I am absolutely certain. The consequences for the loss will be genuinely dire. And George Clooney joined the chorus for Biden to withdraw. Public rebuke has been less forthright from members of Congress, who mostly have privately griped about Biden's dire re-election prospects, but most haven't done so publicly. The first to break the veil of silence was Texas Democratic Representative Lloyd Doggett, who called on Biden to withdraw from the presidential race. He said not only because of Biden's abysmal debate performance, which highlights his age, a nagging concern among the electorate, but because he is dangerously lagging in the polls. Immediately after the debate, there were a number of Democratic Congress members who privately worried that President Biden couldn't make the case for re-election to the American public. They stayed mum. But now a growing number of them are going public with their concerns. They worry that President Biden might not just lose the presidency, but that his loss might take down any Democratic hopes for retaining the House and Senate as well. With every Democratic defection from Biden's re-election camp comes a position statement. Too many to list here. This sample provides an overview. Hava told the New York Times on Wednesday that Biden needs to shoulder the responsibility for keeping that seat, and part of that responsibility is to get out of this race. Moulton told WBUR on Thursday that Biden has done enormous service to our country, but that Biden should follow in one of our founding fathers, George Washington's footsteps, and step aside to let new leaders rise up and run against Donald Trump. Quigley told MSNBC that Biden's legacy is set and that we owe you the greatest debt of gratitude. He added that the only thing that you can do now is to cement that for all time and prevent utter catastrophe, is to step down and let someone else do this. Craig, a prominent moderate in the swing district in a critical swing state, said she does not believe that Biden can effectively campaign and win against Donald Trump, and that's why I respectfully call on President Biden to step aside as the Democratic nominee for a second term as president and allow for a new generation of leaders to step forward. Senators are generally more reserved about getting out in front of an issue. Initially, the Washington Post reported that Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, is assembling a group of Democratic senators to ask Joe Biden to exit the presidential race. Soon after this meeting was reported on, Senator Warner called it off. The main theme here is that President Biden, while still an effective president, is about to lose a critical election to Donald Trump. Several leading media organizations, including The Economist, The New Yorker, and The New York Times, have weighed in saying that Biden should leave the race. They all say that Biden did a great job as a one-term president, but that his low numbers, along with voters' concerns about his age and health, risk Biden losing a re-election bid and installing Trump back into office. The Economist avers that the presidential debate was awful for Joe Biden, but the cover-up has been worse. It was an agony to watch a befuddled old man struggling to recall words and facts. His inability to land an argument against a weak opponent was dispiriting, but the operation by his campaign to deny what tens of millions of Americans saw with their own eyes is more toxic than either because its dishonesty evokes contempt. The Economist continues that the effect has been to put the White House within Donald Trump's grasp. Fresh polls have found that voters in the states Mr. Biden must win have moved against him. His lead may be in danger even in once safe states such as Virginia, Minnesota, and New Mexico. Over at The New Yorker, David Remnick opined that for the president to insist on remaining the Democratic candidate would be an act not only of self-delusion, but of national endangerment. He wrote, "So much, perhaps too much, now depends on one man, his family, and his very small inner circle coming to a painful and selfless conclusion. And yet Joe Biden always wanted to be thought of as human, vulnerable, someone like you and me. All of us are like him in at least one way. It's sad to go to pieces like this, but we all have to do it. There's no shame in growing old. There is honor in recognizing the hard demands of the moment." And the New York Times opined, to serve his country, President Biden should leave the race. And in the Times, a slew of other columnists wrote their own opinion pieces chiming in. The Times had written, Mr. Biden answered an urgent question on Thursday night. It was not the answer that he and his supporters were hoping for, but if the risk of a second Trump term is as great as he says it is, and we agree with him that the danger is enormous, then his dedication to this country leaves him and his party only one choice. The clearest path for Democrats to defeat a candidate defined by his lies is to deal truthfully with the American public, acknowledge that Mr. Biden can't continue his race, and create a process to select someone more capable to stand in his place to defeat Mr. Trump in November. The Times continues that it is the best chance to protect the soul of the nation and the cause that drew Mr. Biden to run for the presidency in 2019 from the malign warping of Mr. Trump. And it is the best service that Mr. Biden can provide to a country that he has nobly served for so long. And there's only one man that can make the decision that most opinionators believe is best for the country, and that is to let another younger candidate run for president. Why not Kamala Harris? She's been an able prosecutor and senator. President Biden might or might not. And what's so sad is Joe Biden has proven himself to be a pragmatic politician, working both sides of the aisle to get things done. Sometimes to our detriment, as when he, as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee many years ago, ushered through the confirmation of a Supreme Court judge with 1 year of experience on the bench, and that was Clarence Thomas. As president, Biden's legislative record has been impressive, including, let's just run it down a little bit, the American Rescue Plan in response to COVID-19, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the first major gun safety bill in decades, building semiconductors and at home through the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, support for Ukraine's defense against a Russian invasion, and boosting NATO. These are highlights, major accomplishments, and all Americans stand to benefit from President Biden's efforts. But he, like so many people in positions of power, may let his ego second-guess the course of reality set before him. It's a danger for him and for his legacy and for our country. Now President Biden needs to decide whether he will leave us with a legacy of achievement or usher in the re-election of Donald Trump and all that entails. Thank you for watching today's program. I apologize for having been away for so long. I hope that you find this format worth the wait, and look over here for other episodes. And if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and write comments below. And I will see you in the next video.